packet, page 40, number 14. First thing, how to set up your x-axis. There's one thing you need to figure out how to set up your x-axis, and that is the period. All right? The period ended up being 4 pi. I took 2 pi divided by the frequency, 1/2. That is not what you go by. That's where you end this curve, as at 4 pi. What do I go by? I take 4 pi, divide it into 4 equal parts, so I'm going by pi. So take a look at the x-axis I have here. Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi over 3 pi, and 4 pi. That's how you figure out the x-axis. All right, it's going by the period. Now, how do you find out what the y-axis is? You got to figure out the what? Max and the min. Where do I get the max and the min from? 2 places, the amplitude and the shift. All right, the amplitude told me I was going to start at -3 and go to 3. But then I shifted it up 2, so I added 2 to both the min and the max and got a new final min and max of -1 to 5. So your curve should have went from -1 to 5 on the y-axis. That's using the range. Any questions on how to find the x or the y-axis before I get to the actual points, which are probably the toughest? Anything on labeling your x or y-axis? This is a cosine curve. I'm trying to get you guys away from, 0, 1, -1. I want you to think in terms of min, max, and midline. So where does cosine usually start? At, don't tell me 1, but at its max. And we already found the max. What was the max? 5, right? But why doesn't this one start at the max? The negative tells me it's actually going to start at the minimum. So that's why all our graphs should be starting at -1. Because of that negative sign, says flip everything. Now take a look at my cosine curve. What's the next key value? Usually where it hits the x-axis, we used to call it zeros, all right? But it's the shift. It's the midline. So not at 0, but at 2. So the next key value will be at 2. Next one's usually at the minimum, but since we flipped it, it's going to be at the max of 5. And then it'll come back down to the midline, which in our case is 2. And it'll usually it finishes at the max, but again, we're flipping it, so it's going to finish at the minimum. How comfortable we are graphing something like that. I picked this one because it threw everything at you. It had a negative, it had an amplitude, and it had a shift. How are we doing here? Are we okay? Because that's about as tough as I'm going to ask you to graph. Anything here? Questions? We good? Here's the deal today. We're going to start doing word problems. But I know you hear that term and you start freaking out. Here's why it's good. Here, the 2 reasons why today may be tough. You got to read. I think you can get over that pretty quick. All right? Second thing is I'm going to put some numbers in these word problems, and we have to figure out as a group, what do those numbers mean? Is that one the period? Is that the frequency? Is that the min? Is that the max? So that's the only tough part about today is taking all the numbers I throw at you in the word problem and figuring out where they go. All right, ready? All right, I don't know what page it's at, but modeling, sinusoidal modeling. I'm not going to go over this, what's in the box, because we know it. Amplitude, midline, frequency, period. Here's the only thing I want you to just jot down. What I am noticing from both my classes, there's a huge issue with understanding period versus frequency. Period versus frequency. Period. I can't put it any simpler. How long it takes to make one cycle. Okay, how long it takes to make one cycle, one rotation, however you want to refer to it. All right, that is what is period. How long it takes to make one cycle or rotation. Okay, first thing I told you, the toughest part is reading it. Go ahead and go. Read through that one for me. And then we'll decide on what all those numbers mean that I gave you. And then I think you guys will see, hey, it's not that bad. It's cute. It gives you a little story about Poughkeepsie, New York, right? Throws in a little solstice. Wow. It's all a cover-up. It's all a cover-up for the numbers. So here's what I need from you guys. Let's see. The first number they give me is what? 9 hours? What's that represent, that 9 hours? That's the? What's the 9 hours? That's my minimum hours of daylight, right? So 9 is my minimum. We've heard of that term before, minimum. That's nothing new. What's the 15? The max. Okay, we've heard of that term before. That's nothing new. And what am I asked to find? The amplitude, which I believe everyone's got a formula for, using these two values. Anybody want to give me a little refresh here on the amplitude formula? 1/2. Well, yeah, I keep forgetting I do divided by 2 with you guys. Max minus min divided by 2. All right. 15 minus 9 over 2. What do we got? 6 over 2. So the amplitude for this one, 3. Other than the reading, was it that bad? No? Especially when you know, when you guys have the power to know what the heck you're doing with these and know the formula. All right. Ooh, we got to graph it now. Great. All right, go ahead and read through it about high tides. Very common example for sine and cosine curves, high tide, low tide. Okay. What's this 36? I'm just going to go right to the numbers. What's the 36? That's my max. What's that 22? That's the minimum here. And then we have a third number now, which is 12. Read what the 12 is. High tide hits every 12 hours. So high tide, 12 hours. Another high tide, 12 hours. What's that 12 referring to here? Every 12 hours it hits high tide. That's how long it takes, right? To go from high tide to high tide. What do we call that? How long it takes? That is the period, yes. So the period is 12. How long it takes to go from high tide to high tide. The way I've taught you guys, I think you guys would prefer an equation first, then graph it first. All right, you guys, I'm pretty sure the way I've been teaching it, you guys like to see an equation first, then graph the equation. So let's start with part B first then. Okay, finding A, B, and C. Anybody want to fill me in on how to find the A value formula? We've done it already. Max minus minimum divided by 2. So that'll end up being 7. All right. Skip over B because that's a little bit tougher to find. Go right to C. What's the formula to find the shift or the midline value? Max plus min divided by 2. So we're looking at a shift or a midline of 29. I do not have a formula for B, but what formula do we use that contains B? Period formula, yep. So I'm going to say P equals 2 pi over B, period formula. What's the period? 12, plug it in for P. And how do we solve for B? We've gone over this before, but cross multiply. So I have 12B equals 2 pi. Go ahead, divide both sides by 12. B equals, I'd like you to reduce it, pi over 6. Keep the pi in your answer. Obviously, don't go to the calculator. You know how I feel about the decimals. All right, what's the equation of this one then? Y equals 7, my amplitude, cosine, what's going in the parentheses? Pi over 6. And I know it does say x. I know you guys are used to it, but it does say t in there, so I'm just going to stick with what the formula said, which is t. Would I take off if you put x? Nope. And then what's my shift? Plus 29. There's the equation. You ready to graph it? This is nothing different than what I asked you to graph at the beginning of class today. Nothing different. How are you going to set up the x-axis? You need what value? Period, which we already know is what? 12. So the key values should be every what? Not 12, but every 3, right? So you know you're going every 3. Hold on, don't graph anything yet. Let's take care of the y-axis while we're here. The y-axis is your range. You don't need to find it because I told you already. What was the max and the min? It went from 22 to 36. So we need to go from 22 to 36 on the y-axis. And I'll let you go on your own here in a second. Just be careful how many, take a look. Sketch the graph of this scenario for 2 full periods. Okay, so you guys should be going past 12 out to what? 24, still going by 3s. Okay? So set up your x-axis. Make sure you go 2 full periods here. And you're going to make a decision on the y-axis because you got to have 22 and 30. Hey, you can't just start at 22 because that means you're going by 22s. Remember, you're starting at 0, so make sure you go by a proper interval that contains 22 and 36. You cannot start at 22. That means you're going by 22s, which I don't think you want to do. And you can remember, this line here doesn't mean you stop here. You can go past that. That's not a big deal. Okay, so go ahead, figure out your y-axis, what you want to go by. Just make sure it contains 22 and 36. It doesn't have to match mine. I went by 2s. Go by 3s, 4s. I don't care. As long as you got 22 and 36 on there. Some of you guys starting to put points on there. Nice. All right, here we go. What curve is it, guys? What curve am I using? Sine or cosine? Okay, this is a cosine curve. Ready? Let's go through the key values. It starts at its, cosine always starts at its max. There's no flipping here because there's no negative value out in front. So the max here was 36, so that's what I'm going to start at, 36. So I'm going to start at 36. Then it goes to, think about your curve, goes from max to, I'm going to start calling it midline or shift. So where's the next point I should plot at 3? 29, yes, my shift, my midline value. And then where does it go? Max, midline, minimum, which we already said was 22. So at 6, it's going to be at 22. And then where's it go back up to? Midline. And finishes at its maximum. And then we just got to repeat again for a second period. Any issues? High tide, low tide, high tide, low tide. Every 12 hours. Anybody nervous, or are we good? I'll let some people finish up their graphs before we go to the next one. Ready to go a little yo-yo now? Yeah, me too. There's my equation. 1.75 cosine pi t plus 2.25. Yo-yo was first dropped from its maximum height. All right, determine the max and the min now. From the equation. From the equation, can you find the max and the min? Remember the two values you got to look at for max and min, the amplitude and the shift. Originally, it was going to go from negative 1.75 to 1.75 with that amplitude. But I'm shifting it where? Shifting it up 2.25 to each. Matt, what's your minimum? Oh boy. 0.5, look at you. No calculator needed. How about the max now? 1.75 plus 2.25. It would be 4, yep. 0.5 and 4. Hey, how long is it going to take before the yo-yo returns to its maximum height? So where'd you drop it from? You dropped it from its maximum height. When's it going to return? This is just a fancy way of saying find the what. Don't yell anything out. I dropped it at its maximum. How long return before I return it? That's a yo-yo, by the way. Returning it to its maximum height. That's a fancy way of me saying, hey guys, find the what. How long it takes to go through one cycle. Yep, period. Find the period. Just so I know what's the frequency to plug in according to the equation. It's going to be in between the cosine and the t, so it's pi. There's my frequency for a period of 2. And just so I don't like to just have the number 2 there. Can we have some context? How much time to what? Hours, years? What's time in? Seconds. Yep. So it's going to take 2 seconds for that yo-yo to get back up. Questions? Okay. I want to do one of the assignment ones with you. If you have your calculators, get them out. If you don't have one, I'll get one to you somehow. What I need you guys to do first, don't want to show anything, is go to number 4 on your assignment. That's the last question. In your groups right now, please sketch that curve on that axis for me. All right, I'm going to do part B with you, but you need your calculators for it. So make sure you have your calculator for part B. But before we do that, let me see you sketch this graph. This is the 3rd time I'm asking you to do a cosine graph today. 3rd time. Let's get to it. So number 4 right now, I want to see you sketch that curve on there. And just let me, I don't know if you guys know what's going on here. Do you see that break on the y-axis? That means you don't have to start at 0. You can start anywhere you want. Okay? So you don't have to start at 0. You can start at the minimum if you want. That break just means you don't have to start at 0. You can start anywhere you want. All right? Your max and your minimum should have been 60, your max 82. Okay, so your graph should have started and ended at 82. Halfway at 12 should have been 60. And then your midline ones at 6 and 18 should have been 71. Right? Any issues getting there? Because we got to move on to the next part here. Again, if you're having trouble, you guys know where I'm at, right, at this point now. All right, everyone ready for part B in your calculator? And I'll tell you why we need the calculator in a second. For the time between 0 and 24, which is what we graphed, 0 to 24, for this time, determine when the outside temp is equal to 75. Everyone see you got the degrees over here, right? So at 75, and I don't need you to put it on yours, just let me show you what we're about to do. So here's 75 degrees right here for me. I want to know how many times does it hit 75 degrees? Twice. Everyone agrees? It hits twice. I want to know what's the hour there and what's the hour there to the nearest tenth. You could probably look at it and go, little less than 6, little over 18, all right? But I need nearest tenth. And that's what your calculator is going to help you do now. We are going to graph both of these right now and find out where they intersect on the calculator. All right, before we do that, if I want to see what this looks like in the calculator, what mode do I need to be in? Radian. So everyone make sure you're in radian mode right now. And anybody else remember what we need to change before I graph any sine or cosine function? I need to change your window. Yes, go to window. And we need to make our window look like the one you have on your paper. So the first value we have to plug in is your x minimum. Well, you tell me, here's your x-axis. What's the minimum value we need to put in? On the x? This is x minimum. 0, right? And then we're going to the maximum on the x, which is, what's my max value? 24. And then it should say what? X scale? Well, you tell me. Well, you guys figure, you guys know it. What's the scale? Going by 6s? And now you're at what? Y min? What's our minimum Y value? 60? All the way to a max of 82? And then when it says scale, I don't know, whatever you went by. I went by what? 2s. If you went by 1s or 3s, go by whatever scale you went with. All right? So make sure you change your window's good. Now go to your Y equals. We got some equations to pop in. First one, the 11 cosine, pi over 2, you can put an x instead of a t, plus 71. So go to your Y equals. And then what's the second equation we need to graph? Y equals 75, or it hits 75. And then once you have all that, you think you're good to go ahead and graph it. Hopefully both graphs go. Hopefully it looks like the one you have on your paper, and then the horizontal line across. Hopefully we all look the same right now. Anybody have any issues before we get to the next part? So we can all do this next part together. I think you guys know how to do it already. You guys remember how to find out where two graphs intersect? Where to go on the calc? Anybody remember from your algebra days probably? Where do I go to find the intersection points? Second calc, everyone. Second trace. You go to calculate. Yep, second trace. And I would like which choice here? Good choice. 5, intersect. Now a blinking spider should come up somewhere. You hit your left and your right arrows to get it as close as possible to the first point of intersection. So I'm going to go to the right first just because it's already there. All right. So get it as close as possible. On the bottom should say first curve. Anybody remember what to do from here? You just hit enter. It'll say second curve, enter again. And then right after guess, you press enter for a third and final time. And that tells you where on the x-axis it's at 75. So if I round this to the nearest tenth, it'll be 19 point. About 19.4. So x equals 19.4. And now there's one more value though. And hey, this is where kids go a little crazy. You got to go through the whole second trace again. You just can't scroll over to the next point and do it all over. All right, so second trace, intersect. Go over to the second point of intersection and hit your enter 3 times. So after 19.4 hours, it'll be at 75. And then, anybody get the second hour? After how many hours will it hit 75 degrees? 4.6. I have 6 hours. All right. Any issues on your calculators? Okay, you could probably legitimately get at least 2 out of the 3 that are remaining done right now. So flip your page backwards, start those right up to the bell. Please don't pack up early.